according to St. John, the 6th chapter. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up a mountain, sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we going to buy bread for all of these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to even get a little. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a young boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they amongst so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, and he had distributed them to those who were seated, so also were the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing might be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When the evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, started across the Sea of Capernaum. It was dark now, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because of a strong wind blowing. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land to where they were going. The gospel of our Lord. Please be seated. I don't know if any of you happened to be watching the headlines coming out of Detroit this past week while we were there. They were priceless, in my opinion, and included things such as downtown Detroit looks like Disney World for the next few days. Project Hope cleans up a 100-block area with help of an unlikely group. Detroiters embrace the visiting Lutherans with open arms. The list goes on and on. One Detroitian even made the comment that it looked a bit like a Skittles factory had exploded as groups of teens were sporting t-shirts of nearly every bright color by the hundreds and thousands. Not to forget the solid 10,000 people each day sporting the neon orange, signifying they were out practicing justice on their service day throughout the city. The crowds gathered in nearly 30,000 in attendance. Ford Field filled with teens primarily from around the country, but also 27 other countries represented. It was impressive, to say the least. Today in our gospel lesson, we catch a glimpse into what happened when Jesus showed up in big ways. From what I can tell, there seems to be a lot of similarities between these two gatherings. In our gospel lesson, the crowd assembled as Jesus came ashore, and there he found the crowd waiting for him. I can only imagine the excitement, the anticipation as he came near. I imagine the whispering and the murmuring of empty bellies that yearned to be filled. While the gathering held at least 6 times that many people, the feeding from John's gospel, there also was the same excitement, determination, and yearning to be filled. Downtown Detroit and wherever the youth were at, out on their certain service projects, had a certain buzz to it. There were people going here and there, and excitement bounded. Now Ford Field, where we gathered for our mass gatherings, was crazy. It was loud, and buzz doesn't even begin to describe the level of energy that was attempted to be contained within that space. It was loud. It was powerful. There was singing, dancing, communion, and engagement on so many different levels. And in both cases, God shows up in the midst of the crowd, and God works in big ways. In the Gospel of John, we find Jesus, God made flesh, doing what seems to be impossible. Jesus manages to take 5 loaves, 2 fish, and create enough that there are leftovers, and baskets upon baskets left over. Not only people ate, but they ate their fill, and it all came from the original gift of the loaves and fishes from a boy in the crowd. An unsuspecting avenue, if you ask me, for God to move and breathe. In Detroit, God met us. God met us in the face of the stranger, in the face of the other dressed in the same strange t-shirt as us, in the face of those who worked tirelessly to pull this gathering together at this magnitude. God met us in all of you who prayed for us and supported us in the midst of our travels. God met us in the face of those who we worked with in Minneapolis. God met us in the early mornings, the late nights, and God showed up in big ways, differently for each and every one of us. God worked in the midst of a bunch of teenagers who many would give a bad rap, an unsuspecting crowd. God worked in the lives of these teens to show a city who most of the world has deemed unredeemable, as they find themselves in the midst of troubles, bankruptcy, gang wars, and other things. Detroit saw hope in the midst of these unsuspecting people. God showed up in the bread and the wine of communion. God makes all things possible and works in what may seem undoable. God shows up and knows the world differently than you and I. God sees the world through a fresh set of eyes and calls us to participate in it. God is always working in and through the lives of which God has created. The boy in our parable, the teens that you commissioned to go out and make a difference in Minneapolis and Detroit, in you and I. God is at work in many different ways in the world. One individual I'd like to highlight was from our mass gathering one night. We heard from lots and lots of different people, from the Motown legends, 2 members of the Temptations and A Miracle, to some popular rap groups. But for me, the one that stood out above them all was a college student who had just graduated. She created a project that would fulfill a unique need. As a textiles major in college, and now at the age of 24, she finds herself as a CEO of a major company, creating coats that transition into sleeping bags for homeless folks to sleep in the winter months. While that in and of itself is impressive to me, as she creates over 1,000 coats a year, even more so is the way that she's founded her organization on the principles of empowering other women. She hires women fresh out of prison, rehab facilities, and many other unfortunate situations. She works together with others to build these women up, to give them hope, to give them job opportunities, provide them with health benefits, and to help them create a better future for themselves and for their families. For she herself was repeatedly told that she would amount to nothing as the daughter of 2 drug and alcohol addicts. By the grace of God, the intervention of some amazing teachers in her life who went above and beyond their traditional roles, she is now making a difference in the world. God shows up and does what seems to be impossible. God showed up in her life and the lives of her employees and those who receive her coats. To give you just a brief snapshot of the things that God did in the midst of our Practice Justice Days, every group went out on one Practice Justice Day in the midst of the gathering. There were over 1.5 million diapers collected, 1,400 backpacks distributed, 3,200 vacant lots cleared of debris, 319 vacant homes boarded up, 1,800 mural boards painted and hung around the city, 36 urban gardens tended and planted, 99 picnic tables built and placed in city parks, 600 neighborhoods affected in the midst of this gathering, and over $450,000 have been raised for Walk for Water, all of which has been promised to be matched. The situation for Detroit may have seemed impossible. The hope that came in and through this unsuspecting group, unbelievable. Today's gospel for me begs the question, what is it in our lives that seems impossible? What are the situations that perhaps we've stuck in the shelf as too big for even God to handle? What are the things standing in our way? And where is it God is working in these situations, and through whom? In our gospel lesson from today, and in our experiences from Minneapolis and Detroit, we begin to see that God is not the one who is stuck to traditional boundaries and limitations, but rather, where the world has deemed it to be impossible, God shows up and defies our expectations. God shows up sometimes in the way we had hoped, and other times in ways beyond our wildest imaginations. May we live our lives open to the miracles of God. May we live our lives in a way that we are open to the wide variety of ways in which God is working, in the ways in which God may show up, be it through a small boy with some loaves and fishes, or an impressively large and loud group of teenagers. God is moving, breathing in the world. God is up to a lot in and through that which God has created. May we be open to taking part in that. Thanks be to God. Let us rise and join in our hymn of the day, 485.